Welcome back. You're still watching The Globe on the SABC News Channel. Children in Uganda returned to school this month after nearly a 2-year shutdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, whilst this is welcome news, authorities fear, though, that one of the world's longest school closures, at least 30% of students may never return to school. Uganda's government says about 15 million students were affected by the closure, and many will likely be lost to the school system because of issues like teen pregnancy, child marriage, and child labour, all of which have been exacerbated by the pandemic. In March 2020, all schools across Uganda shut down as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. Since then, Uganda has kept schools fully or partly closed, putting some children's education on hold for as long as the 83 weeks that's being reported. Well, to tackle the learning crisis in Uganda, Save the Children International launched catch-up clubs, an innovative approach to accelerate the recovery of lost learning during the pandemic and help children successfully return to school. I spoke to the head of education at Save the Children Uganda, Edison Nsubuga. Edison Nsubuga, head of education at Save the Children in Uganda. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure.
Now, it should be good news that children are back at school after one of the longest school closures in the world because of the pandemic, but you have concerns.
Indeed, it is a great pleasure because the long school closure has been a huge challenge to parents, to schools, education system, but most especially the learners who have had to compromise their security, their well-being. And so it is a great news that schools are now up and running.
But you're still concerned, though. Some children may not be making it back to school.
Yes, it is a huge concern that during the long break out of school, a number of children, especially the teenage girls, have gotten pregnant, others have given birth, while others, due to economic hardships in their households, have got involved into economic activities, others into exploitative labor, but they have to fend for their families. Others have different challenges like children with disabilities, while others are living in refugee areas. So given the complexity of some learners, it is a huge challenge that a big number of children will not come back due to poverty, due to loss of interest, and due to massive loss of learning.
Well, with this massive loss of learning, what has been actually happening during the pandemic, during the closures? Has no learning been happening at all?
There have been a lot of effort to keep learning going. For instance, there has been learning programs on radios and televisions, others studying online on Zoom, while government and the partners also printed hard copy materials which they distributed in households. However, materials in the hands of children is one thing, actual utilization is another. So a vast majority of children have not got adequate support from either their parents, siblings, or community members, and as such, very little meaningful learning has happened. It has been important to keep the learning going, but effectiveness has been greatly challenged. So given that even before COVID, a number of children were lagging behind, especially in literacy and numeracy, with a long break out of school, and that causes even the decay of what they had already learned. So with the learning decay and lost learning time, and given other circumstances surrounding vulnerable children, there is need for focus and attention to support the vulnerable children if they are to return to school.
And we'll talk about the support that they'll need once they're back at school. But I just wonder what can be done about the time that's lost. I mean, it's nearly 2 years. So some kids have hardly had any learning. What happens to them? How do they catch up?
Well, we can't cycle back the clock. The time which has gone has passed. So what needs to be done is to think of strategies for catching up. And ideally, the catching up is in different forms. One is the content covered in schools. While that is very important, children who are already lagging behind, especially in reading, writing, may still not be able to catch up with the pace inside the school. So that is why there is need for remedial approaches, different remedial strategies targeted to the different needs of learners. For instance, Save the Children is implementing the catch-up approach, and within this approach, it is teaching or supporting children who have been lagging behind in their literacy to catch up so that they get the requisite skills which will enable them to be successful inside the classroom. So this approach is based on the teach at the right level approach, where children are graded according to their reading ability and supported according to their ability, not necessarily the grades or the age where they're supposed to be. So we highly believe as Save the Children that more emphasis should be put on catch-up approaches and other remedial strategies to ensure that the children at the verge of dropping out while they return can be supported to keep at pace with their learning.
So these are catch-up clubs that you're talking about. I believe that you have a number of these in other countries as well. How have they gone so far, and how do they work? Is this happening at the same time as kids are in school, and then after school they go to these catch-up clubs, or what happens?
Well, during the long time when schools have been closed, the catch-up has been a lifeline for a number of children from poor households who have been participating in these clubs. And while schools are reopened, then it's going to be to complement what happens in a school as a form of remedial. And this will be both during out of school time, during weekends, for instance, when children don't come to school, and sometimes during long breaks, holiday breaks from school. So this approach helps the children to top up with what their learning ability, especially in literacy and numeracy. And once they get those skills, it becomes very easy to get to pace with the rest of the curriculum content.
Which age groups are you targeting with these catch-up programs? Because I guess for older children, it might be a little easier to catch up. I know that when you're younger, a year is an eternity, actually, in terms of development and education.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed that is true. But if a child by any bad luck goes into upper classes without mastering the lower level skills, it becomes a huge waste of their time to sit in class. And we have seen this before, where a number of children complete primary without necessarily being able to read a simple text with the comprehension. So the focus of this program is first and foremost for children in upper classes, but we assess and find out those who are at a very difficult circumstance, and those are the ones who participate in the catch-up. In the lower level classes, this approach and methodology is being used because the young children have been out of school even longer than the old one. So at the end of the day, the catch-up program is integrating children in the lower primary and children in the upper primary to ensure that we top up their literacy and numeracy skills.
government has decided that all children coming back to school are going to automatically come back in the higher grade, even though they've missed out in nearly 2 years of school. Is this the right approach, or should they perhaps be held back a year so that they can get that learning that they've missed?
Well, it is a good attempt to try to clear the system, because there was going to be a system clogging where one class would have multi-year grades in one class. So I think government saw it necessary to promote everyone, but that is a challenge in itself, if there is no strategy to support the children within the classes they have gone. So if we take that from the face value, we shall solve one problem of system clogging, but create another of learning crisis, where children will be in classes where they are not able to perform and learn to their best.
You talked a little bit earlier on about some children getting pregnant, and some have become mothers. Is the system working in such a way that they can come back to school, or what's going to happen to girls like this? Because chances are, if they don't get back into school now, they probably will never.
Yes, from a policy perspective, government has come up with a policy for re-entry into school for pregnant girls, and also controlling pregnancies in school. This is a policy government has come up with. It has been received with mixed reactions, with some moralists thinking that children who have gotten pregnant or have given birth are not morally upright and therefore should be out of school. But the argument is education is good for every child. These are mothers, these are pregnant girls, they're teenagers, but they are children, and their rights needs to be protected. And I think government has done it wise, and the whole society should really apologize for these children, because it is a responsibility of society to protect the children, but society failed in their obligation of protecting children. They were abused, and a number of them became pregnant against their own will, and so incarcerating them by chasing them out of school is not a right approach. What is important is to see how they can be supported to learn from within the schools, even when they go back to give birth, or during the time when their babies are too young. We need an approach which can reach out to them, maybe with the home learning pack or offline learning, to ensure that they keep learning.
What does one do about those children that have given up, who just believe that they can't ever catch up and are just not even going to bother trying?
Yeah, that is the biggest challenge with so many children. Actually, a number of them still have faith that they can do it, but they have been pulled up by other factors, one being economical. Many children have really handled the money, have put money in their pockets, and they are more excited to work and get money than actually going to school, because a number of them believe they are studying to get well, to get wealth, to get money. And if they have found means of getting it, why go back to school? So this is the type of children who need a differentiated form of support. And at Save the Children, we are looking at a accelerated learning program, which is more flexible, which can allow children to do more than studying, and which can enable them to fast track their learning. For instance, instead of going for 7 years in primary, it can be condensed into 3 years with the level 1, 2, and 3. So this could be some of the incentives which could bring back some of the children with the difficulties, especially those who have lost interest. The other barrier is poverty. a number of households are living under extreme poverty, and so there is need for cash interventions and this household support to ensure that the highly marginalized can re-enter school and can stay there and learn.
All right, and that partly answers my last question to you. And I guess it's really about what can be done. And what's your call maybe to governments and donor organizations about how they can assist and what they need to do to make sure that kids come back to school, are able to carry on with their learning and thrive?
Yeah, probably three things. First is to intensify the Get Back to School campaign, which Save the Children has launched in partnership with the Ministry of Education in Uganda, such that the message reaches every corner of the country, every child and every household, that this is the opportunity to take every child back to school. Secondly is to look into different strategies which can help both children and the teachers when they get back into school, because their well-being has been affected equally, the parents, teachers, and the learners. So there is need for that support to ensure that well-being of the children and teachers is addressed. Third is to ensure that there are strategies to help children get back to learning, catch up, and succeed. And probably lastly is a strategy around ensuring that the school remains a safe place for learners, safe in terms of being COVID-free by supporting schools to observe all the necessary precautions and measures such that we do not reopen and close schools, but rather schools continue, but in a more safe manner for all stakeholders. Thank you.
Edison Nsubuga, Head of Education at Save the Children in Uganda. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. And we wish you the very best of luck in terms of trying to get our kids back to school and thriving once again. Thanks for your time.